Yo, how's it going, everybody? In today's video, we're going to be looking at our Blizzard Ice-Spike Sorcerer. This build, I've actually been able to push up pretty far. I've also actually reached level 100 here on the Sorcerer, so that's definitely helped. But this overall complete build, I've been playing in like tier 70s, and at that tiers, it's usually more like modifier dependent. But in 50s and 60s, you guys will be able to speed clear them. So if you guys are looking to level up your glyphs and just speed farm, this is actually going to be a really good way of doing so. And also a very good way of pushing up the nightmare tiers, just because you can play it a little bit safe, more at range. I was actually very impressed with the amount of damage this build can put out, and also the sustain on this as well, because we are using Blizzard, obviously, and that can use up a good amount of mana. But if you guys are playing it correctly, you will always be able to cast a Blizzard whenever you feel like it, which is very helpful. And the overall ad clear on top of that is just so good. You can make like the whole ground just Blizzard with ice spikes flying up everywhere, and you can just run through. So a lot of times with this build, you guys are just going to be like casting on enemies and freezing them and just moving on. They're not going to technically be dead yet, but they will be by the time you move off screen, and you just move on to the next pack and just speed farm. We also utilize a really cool synergy between two of the aspects in this build, which I thought was very cool. And overall, we are going to be obviously using pretty much some of the similar things that sorcerers use, like Flame Shield, Teleport, and Frost Nova. Those are just kind of givens in almost every single sorcerer build out there. But we do get to use a couple other things that I have not used yet, which I'm very excited to do so in this build. But as always, I'll have the written version of the build over on our website, so I'll have a link to that down in the description. So if you want to check that out, make sure to head on over there. But anyways, let's go ahead and jump right into this build video. As always, we're going to start with our skills and our enchantments with this build. So as I already stated, we are going to be using the Flame Shield, Teleport, and Frost Nova. I'm not going to go super in depth into these, but Flame Shield is immunity, and also it's going to allow us to immobilize enemies, which is going to be a lot of extra damage. Teleport to group enemies with our unique chest piece, and also just to get in and out of areas. Frost Nova is going to be the main way we start dealing damage. It's going to also make enemies vulnerable, so overall, just a huge boost in our damage. Enemies being frozen is a very big part of this build, and obviously Blizzard can do that, but it takes a little bit of time. This is the instant way of doing so. And then we're going to be using Deep Freeze. This is a skill that I've not used really at all until this build, and we're going to be using an aspect with it that's actually going to pair with our Blizzard aspect, so that's going to be very helpful. And also, just having another immunity is very huge, and the ad clear from this is very good as well. I also have a terrible aspect for this at the moment. I have a Sacred aspect for its ice spikes, and its ad clear is going to get way better once I find a better version of that. But if you guys use this while you're waiting for more cooldowns or you're about to die, you're going to be able to clear out most of the trash ads and just leave the couple elites or whoever is left in a weakened state. It's going to be actually very helpful. So I'm a big fan of this skill. And then we're going to be using Ice Blades just for the little bit of cooldown, and also another way of applying vulnerable. And just having another skill that is a cooldown is very helpful, because every time we use a cooldown, we're going to get mana back with one of our aspects. Then obviously Blizzard is going to be our main source of damage. Now Blizzard itself actually doesn't do the damage. It's really only the ice spikes. Blizzard itself does pretty much nothing, but we're going to be able to make it last a lot longer when we cast it above 50 mana. So really you're going to be using this in like spurts. So you use it like maybe twice, then use a couple of your other skills to regen your mana, and then use it again. So that way you can always have that increased duration active. And then for our enchantments, Firebolt, as always, Blizzard itself cannot do so, but we have a couple other ways of actually applying the burning effect, so we're going to keep this on. And then Ice Shards is a ton of extra damage. This is automatically going to fly out at enemies that are frozen. So every time our Blizzard freezes something, every time our Frost Nova freezes something, these are just going to automatically start flying out. It's really going to help out your clear speeds and just apply some extra damage to those single targets. Quickly going through our skill tree, we're just going to be putting 2 points into Firebolt here, so we can move down and also just have this freely available as our enchantment. And then we're going to be maxing out Ice Shards and then doing Enhanced Ice Shards. We don't need any of the Greater or Destructive, because these won't be active with the enchantment, but we will actually be able to have them ricochet, and then also having the more points is going to allow them to do more damage. And then just 1 point into all of our defensive skills, so Flame Shield, Teleport, and Frost Nova. And then for Flame Shield, we're grabbing Shimmering on the Teleport, and also Mystical Frost Nova, so we make them vulnerable. Then moving down, we're going to do 1 point into Ice Blades, and then grab in Summoned Ice Blades so we can get a little bit more cooldown. And then on our defensive aspects, well, not aspects, our skills here, we're going to have mana shield and also protection. Protection is so huge. It's a ton of free barrier. It's going to save you from a lot of dots because it would actually make the dots go away. So if you get inflicted by a lot of poison, just use any of your cooldowns and it will go away for those 2 seconds and you'll have your barrier active. So you can just keep chaining those until the dot is gone. And then we do have a couple extra points. We're going to put it into precision magic just because the lucky hit chance is very good for our ice blades and also just keeping our mana up with some of the other things that we have in this build. And then we're only putting 1 point in a blizzard. Like I said, it does not do a ton of damage by itself. It's just there to proc the ice spikes. So we don't need a lot of points into there to make it do anything. And then mage's blizzard, so we can make it have that increased duration when we cast above 50 mana. And then, as always, with every single sorcerer build, Devouring Blaze, get 3 points into there, ton of extra damage. And then, obviously, once we get to our amulet, you're going to be looking for +3 into there, and that's how you can get the 6 out of 3 that you see right here. And then we're going to do Cold Front, just so we can apply a little bit more chill and freeze enemies faster. And then we're going to max out Deep Freeze over here. So our cooldowns are actually reduced by 50% when Deep Freeze ends. So that's where I was saying, if you guys are waiting on your cooldowns and there's a lot going on, just proc Deep Freeze and just wait out your cooldowns. It's super helpful. Deep Freeze itself does have a slightly longer cooldown, which stinks, but it is very useful when you use it in the right scenarios. And then otherwise, we're going to max out all of the ice nodes over here. So Permafrost, Hoarfrost, Icy Touch, and Frigid Breeze. And then our key passive, we're going to be using Shatter for most things. And if you guys are specifically doing a boss, you can swap to Avalanche if you guys are doing like Uber Lilith or anything like that, if you're trying out that stuff with this Blizzard build, which is the main way Sorcs have been killing her. You can swap to Avalanche, or if you guys really want to make sure your boss kills are efficient as you're moving up Nightmare tiers, just go ahead and respec this 1 point when you get to the boss fight, but you don't need to for most scenarios. I never do. Time to move on over to our aspects and our gear, and then also our unique that we're going to be using, but we're going to start off with the aspects and the unique here first. So starting off with our helmet, we're just going to be using the extra charge of Frost Nova. This, like I said, is just another way of applying vulnerable, and you guys are going to be getting this back all the time. I really find that second charge helpful. If you guys don't want that second charge, you want a little bit more survivability, you can replace it with while you're in your own blizzard. You take 25% less damage. That's going to help you guys out. And then we're going to be using the raiment. This is just always something you're basically to be using on Sorcerer. It's going to allow your teleports to group enemies and stun them, and stunning is a big way we get a lot of damage. And then on our gloves, I have the deal increased damage while you have a barrier. Anytime we use a cooldown, anytime we kill a frozen enemy, you guys are going to have a barrier. So that's anytime you're doing damage, this is going to be active. And then we're going to be using disobedience, so we can stack up that armor. On the boots, we're going to have the flame shield, allows us to move through enemies and immobilize them. That's how we're going to be able to trigger a ton of extra damage by immobilizing them with our flame shields. On my wand, I have the increased damage to stun enemies. Every time we teleport in, they're going to be stunned. So that's free 40% right there. On the amulet, I do have aspect of control on. I've seen some people with these blizzard builds put the ice spikes up there. You can do that, but I also have the ice shards doing damage, and I want everything to be boosted a little bit more than the ice spikes in general. You're not going to notice a huge difference, so you guys can play around with swapping these two around. And then obviously, like I said, blizzard ice spikes is going to be our main source of damage through this whole thing. So I have that currently on my focus. But then for the rings, we're going to have the using a cooldown restores mana. I happen to have a max version, which is super helpful, but even a base version, 15 mana is really good with how much you guys are spamming your cooldowns. And then I also have the deep freeze ice spike. So this is where I was saying the two aspects are going to actually synergize. So the deep freeze ice spikes, they get increased explosion radius. That's actually going to translate to your blizzard ice spikes. So not only are they going to be dealing increased damage to frozen enemies, they're also going to be dealing increased radius to them as well, since they're kind of the same thing. So that's super helpful. It's going to allow you guys to hit a lot more consistently on the enemies. And it's also a reason we're not using a certain glyph in our Paragon board, which we'll get to. And it just makes it a lot more consistent for hitting smaller enemies. But if you guys don't really care about the deep freeze ice spikes, like I said, this aspect is very bad. This is a sacred right now. As you can see, it's well below the current range that I should be having with it. There's a couple other things you could use. So you could use the increased crit chance while injured against injured, and then also the increased crowd control while you're healthy. You can use the increased crowd control and then extra damage to unstoppable. This is going to be a little bit better if you guys are pushing up nightmares and you're not really killing all of the enemies. in like 1 CC. So that way you can actually finish them off when they're unstoppable. Or you can use the increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. This sounds super conditional. It's really not. Every time you are doing damage, you guys are basically going to be casting a Frost Nova, which is going to make them vulnerable, or your Ice Blades are going to be making them vulnerable. And then also, obviously, when you use a cooldown, you get a barrier. So these are basically always active when you're doing damage, so it's free. But if you guys happen to have modifiers where the vulnerable durations is reduced, then you're not really going to see this. So it's kind of going to depend on your situation. I don't currently have it set up, but if you guys want to do something crazy, you can do like a two-handed swap method for the bosses. So if you guys actually had the like increased crowd control instead of the deep freeze ice spikes on one of your pieces of gear, like your ring, you could actually knock down a boss with that and have that increased crowd control, and then swap over to like a two-hander with the ice spikes. And then you could have a two-handed ice spikes with a amulet aspect of control and just nuke them. So then otherwise for like passives, I look for max life. Cooldown is a big one. Basically everything that we have is a cooldown skill. So having as much cooldown as possible is really gonna help you guys out. Crowd control duration is helpful. There's also like max mana you could get here on the helmet. On our gloves, crit chance, attack speed isn't terrible. And then another big one is the lucky hit chance to restore primary resource. That's gonna help you guys sustain more mana and cast more blizzards, so that's super helpful. And then on our pants, I usually just go pure defensive, so I got max life, armor, damage reduction while injured, and damage reduction from close. And then on the boots, you're just going to get all of your defensive skills, so teleport, flame shield, frost nova, all the pluses to there. That's going to help you guys out with cooldowns and also staying immune longer in flame shield. Then you can either do mana cost reduction or movement speed or damage reduction while injured if you guys are pushing up a little bit higher. On our weapons, just crit damage, vulnerable, you can do your core skills or just like damage to crowd control, damage to close, whatever other conditional damage on there is you're going to be good to go. On our focus, I like to run cooldown. Lucky hit chance isn't bad. Obviously crit chance. Another chance to restore primary resource is going to help your sustain. On the rings, I don't really have good rings for this right now, but max life, crit damage, crit chance, vulnerable, max mana, any of those things are going to be good. Here on this one, I have lightning crit damage. This is actually still from our shock sorcerer, so I've not been able to replace this yet, but it does the job with crit chance and crit damage. It's going to be a lot better once I do get the vulnerable. And then on the amulet, the main things you're going to be looking for is Devouring Blaze and cooldown reduction. And then if you can get the cherry on top of defensive skills, that's going to be what you want. You guys are going to be able to have much lower cooldowns on everything that you have and still deal a ton of extra damage with that Devouring Blaze. Super quick, I did just want to talk about the gameplay of this build because it does actually make a difference. One thing you're really going to want to get used to is just keeping your cursor basically on the edge of your screen and casting your blizzards the moment you can see an enemy go onto the edge. So that way you can get the blizzard started before you teleport in and use all of your stuns and CCs, all that good stuff. Because the ice spikes actually take like a second to start coming out of your blizzard. So if you cast that first and then go in, by the time your ice spikes start, you will have just casted all of your CC, which is obviously our biggest damage window and our smallest window. So if we can line those up perfectly, you guys are gonna be able to kill elites much quicker. If you go in and try to stun and then cast your blizzards, a lot of the time the enemies are gonna come out of their CC before they're actually getting hit by the brunt of the ice spikes. So if you do that one little change, I promise you, you're going to see a big difference in your damage output. Yeah, overall, that's our Blizzard Ice Spike Sorc. I was actually very impressed with this build and had a lot of fun with it. And I'm very curious to see what Sorcerer is going to shape up to be here in Season 1 next week. I think this character is going to get the most amount of changes just because it's in a really weird spot at the moment. So I think they're going to do a lot to kind of make up for that. And I'm curious to see what is actually going to be like the strongest Sorcerer build. I know this is definitely considered as one of them. Obviously, a lot of people run ice shards. I was a huge fan of our ball lightning build that we did the other week, and I'm curious to see how that all shakes up. I think fire is actually going to be a very strong choice next week. So if you guys are interested in any sort of sorcerer builds or anything else here, Diablo, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. I'm going to be covering a ton of Season 1, so hopefully I'll see you guys back for that. Otherwise, make sure you go check out the written build over on our website. But anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you in the next video. See ya.